All right, we are on the air. Welcome to our May 6th council work session. We have a couple of counselors not here yet, but they're going to join us as we go on. We have a quorum, so we're going to start, and I'm going to turn over to Peter Passerelli and Adam Moore to talk about our parks and green space goal.
Thank you, Mayor Betty. Council members, I'm Peter Passerelli. I'm the Public Works Director, and with me this evening is Adam Moore, our Parks Development Coordinator. And we are here to give our first update on our Parks and Green Space goal. I'm going to try to follow the same format that Joseph did in April, going over the Economic Development Goal. So we spent some time, putting this together over the last several months. Certainly still some work to do on it. I think we met with Councilor Massey about 2 weeks ago and went over the document and got some feedback from him. I think what we've got is a pretty good draft as we start forward with this goal. Councilor Massey, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add at this point?
No, I thought it was a good session we had, and we'll hear from others tonight.
Perfect. So our Parks and Green Space goals, same format, like I said.
Sorry, can I, my pen is dying. Scott, you got an extra pen somewhere? Go ahead. Oh, wow, I don't take fancy pen.
Thank you.
Let me just have a Milwaukie. Okay, thanks.
Well, per federal guidance, you can have 3 pens.
3 pens, not 30. Yeah. Okay, sorry for interrupting.
No, all good. So the language I think we settled on at our council retreat in late January, early February, and then at the council regular session in early February was Parks and Green Space goal, deliver Milwaukie Day Park and expand equitable access to green space, including the future restored Kellogg Creek natural area. Why this goal? And I'm going to read what I've put together, and Adam and I've put together on this. Milwaukie is advancing a vision for parks and natural spaces that reflects the city's 2040 community vision and comprehensive plan. Milwaukie residents value parks and natural areas as vital to the city's livability, health, and equity. Building on years of successful community-driven planning and equity-based investment, the city desires to complete signature projects like Milwaukie Bay Park and initiate the restoration of the Kellogg Creek natural area, which is associated with the Kellogg Dam removal. With a focus on equity, Milwaukie aims to expand access to high-quality green spaces, particularly in historically underserved neighborhoods. Between 2025 and 2027, the city has a unique opportunity to deliver transformative environmental and recreational amenities that promote health, community connection, and environmental stewardship across all parts of Milwaukie. Any thoughts or suggestions on that language, or?
I think that reads pretty well.
Good. So what do we want to accomplish by 2027? I think first and foremost, Milwaukie Bay Park substantially completed by the end of 2027. We're trying to work a plan to get that moving along. We want to have also the next one, Kellogg Dam removal in progress, and hopefully some of the restoration underway in the new Kellogg Creek natural area. Higher public satisfaction with park quality, access, and amenities. More Milwaukie residents enjoying a quality green space within a short walk from home. And increased acres of parkland and accessible green space within the city. Any thoughts or suggestions on those, or?
Well, I had one thought, which I don't know if it would be its own sort of key bullet there, or it's just sort of a subset of one or more of them. But I do think it's an opportunity to think about enhancing our tree canopy. I think we have a lot of parks like Ardwell Park, the one where you're Stanley Park. We have a lot of parks where there's some real potential to add more tree canopy. And so I'd like to see some sort of tree canopy goal or this.
Okay,
I do like that. We chose to name it both parks and green space, trying to be more bit like all encompassing. And I do like that. Right? How do we, in some neighborhoods, it will be really hard in 3 years to have robust parks coverage. But having a plan for that, investing in something like tree canopy and other things to create more green neighborhoods, I think is more doable.
I thought I had a bullet in the action roadmap that spoke to the tree, the canopy, and working together on the equity implementation plan that Katie's mentioned. And also, I think it factors into sort of that green space strategy that we're going to work on as well. But yeah, we can certainly add something related to tree canopy.
So this would sort of make, because when we look at large park development, the aim for that 40% or more to protect the existing trees on site. So if these 3 parks we build, the only healthy tree over 4 inches that we got out was the English holly. And now English hollies are it's a tree species list. So I think we do take great care when we develop our parks or our green spaces and maintaining that canopy or adding the canopy. I think when we've looked at a couple potential drop-in amenities or replacement amenities, we look at mitigation, how many trees we need to plant to offset some of that work or where there are opportunities for trees. But I think what you're suggesting is outside of replacing an amenity or developing a full park with green space, look at these parks and green spaces actively for trees and make that part of
And
a
I
project
think,
in and of itself.
I wouldn't, and I wouldn't limit it to, designated parks. I think the city owns property for our utilities and other things where we have some potential to also create better green space. Add tree canopy and create a better green space.
Yeah, I think that the newer parks kind of are going to have a life of their own in getting the canopy, but it's probably a good idea to loop back and look at some of those existing spots, can we go in? That's a relatively easy and low cost effort. And I've been concerned about the tree canopy goal for a while, but we just don't, it's not much movement.
And I'll tell you, one that I've heard from residents is Ardmore Park. They have concerts there, so they try to have an open lawn in the middle, but everybody on a hot night is sitting way over to one side because that's where the shade is. So creating more shade along that path, or I don't know, I don't want to dictate where it should go, but I think there are ways to infill some more trees in there and still kind of not interrupt the concert, potential there. So that's one where I've heard the neighborhood would like to just go in and plant trees. I'm like, you can't just go in and plant trees. Now I realize that, and so for those of you, which I guess is the council president right here, who don't know, we are launching into talks with NCPRD about our master or comprehensive or cooperative, whatever word we're using for it, IGA. And so I think there will be some issues that arise out of that about tree planting and who's going to be responsible for watering trees and who's going to, all of those things. So, it's not as easy as just sticking a tree in the ground, I guess is what I want to say. And I don't know that all those older parks probably don't have the irrigation that we put in our newer parks, right? So, some of them will be difficult.
There's certainly opportunities, though, so for sure. Yeah. Okay. We'll work on some language there to add as one of those bullets there related to tree canopy. I think the next section is sort of how are we measuring success for this work? So the first item that we have up there is Milwaukie Bay Park completion. And, we're looking at measuring that in terms of the percent of the project being complete. As of, I think it was as of October of '22, when we paused on the work with NCPRD, or they paused on the work, they had got to the point where they had developed 50% construction. So they had gone through the design process and they got to the point where they had a 50% complete construction set of plans. And we were working collaboratively to see what opportunities were to reduce the cost, and, looking at materials and amenities and all those different things. And there was a lot of savings to be made in terms of changing out material types and things like that. We had made some significant progress, and I think on that, and that's sort of sitting out there waiting to get kickstarted and started up again. And so right now, as of December 31, 2024, that next phase of the project hasn't been fully funded yet. We had a funding plan in place. We thought we had a commitment, but that's sort of still sitting out there. So construction hasn't started. What we're hoping to do by the end of this year, fingers crossed, is, we have those final construction plans completed. We've come to an agreement with the Park District and the county on how they're going to fund their share of the project, and that funding is secured. That's our goal.
Well, I love that statement of goal, and I share that goal wholeheartedly. But do you think we ought to, for purposes of this document, do you think we ought to be breaking it down into funding versus
Funding versus construction?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess maybe not.
I think the funding piece is really foundational to starting the construction. So it's part of that 2.5-year program that we're looking at right now, I think. So if we don't have that, we're not moving forward with construction.
If we got our funding agreement finalized by September, you think it's a realistic timeline that we would be able to open the park in 2027?
I think by 2027, we could be substantially complete. So by the end of that year, it's tight for sure. But, having the funding secured by September and, NCPRD then taking that project, or the city taking the project and moving it, getting a contractor on board by the end of the year. There's certainly a lot of work to do, not as much as there's a lot of work to do, but we've got a good foundation there when we're sitting there with the 50% construction plans. Ideally, they'd start early spring, late winter. And so that'd be 2026, so about 18 months, maybe 20 months. I think we could be pretty close to being substantially complete. It's optimistic and aggressive, but yeah.
Would this be a good time for us to bring you to update?
Sure.
I think that it might, because I see some question marks in people's face. So maybe we just take that opportunity
Okay.
to talk about that. Yeah, I'll start. And so basically, we've had 3 meetings. And basically, the most important meeting was the last one, where Chair Roberts basically said that they had run our initial proposals, which was to concentrate on Milwaukie Bay Park. And they didn't get go ahead from the there was a completion or substantial progress on the master idea. So was discussed at the meeting was that the county administrator basically said that he feels like we can get the master IGA done in 60 days. Now, I was skeptical of this at first, remain somewhat skeptical still,
As you should.
but at least I think that that showed some impetus to move on.
Yeah.
And if we can make, I had a lot of questions about completion of the IGA because the IGA is big, it had a lot of big issues beyond just what we've talked about in this room. SDCs and running the so I said the ink had to be dried, on this thing in 60 days. And the answer that we got, is what I got, was that the county chair would go back to the commission if there was substantial progress on the IGA in those 60 days. So that then we could move into
Two tracks.
two tracks to discuss the actual Milwaukie Bay Park while we finish up the master IGA.
Interesting.
So that's kind of where we are. I don't know, missed something.
No, I think that's the key. I think that's,
So we've
Excellent.
taken, I think we have, there remains risk, but at least there's a glimmer of hope, at least what was conveyed to us. And we'll probably know within the next 2 months whether that hope was substantiated or not.
and just to be clear, the IGA discussion is a staff discussion. We're not going to be at the table. Or not at any continuous role in that. But once the idea is, if we get to this, July, and we've got this, we're ready to go on Milwaukie Bay Park, then we'll resume our council, our electeds meeting.
That's when the mayor and I will start meeting with Greg and Paul again. But right now, it's just staff to staff. And that is Joe, Peter, Adam, right?
It's the plan.
With Kia and her staff. And that's the way IGA should be done.
Sounds optimistic, cautiously optimistic, but yeah. At least there's a idea of a pathway forward,
Well, and,
concept.
We were going to talk about this with you anyway. I just thought that this
Yeah.
might be a good spot to insert it.
no, I
Interesting. That's
agree.
good to know.
And, Gary Schmidt said something about, nose to the grindstone. I can't remember what was his phrase, but,
We will move mountains. Staff will move mountains.
to get it done. Because I think Chair Roberts was, concerned about, how long it could take. He was sensing our concern, and I think he was sharing our concern. And so there was this idea of 2 months, and then we'll, reassess and hopefully start back up on the Milwaukie.
You guys use the old good cop, bad cop routine?
Did you want to add anything?
No, I think that's a great summary, back to the council president's question about, is this realistic? I mean, this is a goal document, so this is the goal. We've been very transparent in these negotiation conversations thus far with our NCPRD partners that to meet this, we would need to have that Milwaukie Bay Park agreement updated by the end of August. So that's where you're hearing this push to get things done in these really fast timelines, because we don't want to back away from this goal unless we absolutely have to.
And we acknowledge it's a stretch goal, but, you got to have some stretch goals, right?
Those construction documents, I think, have been sitting at 50% design since 2020. So if opening in 2027 is just 7 years later, it seems like the right
So
time.
that gets to a question I had, and I don't know if this is something you guys feel like you can answer, but, so if we we do have these 50% design documents. If we get to we have a dollar figure and we're gonna have to cut something and we have to do value engineering, my least favorite euphemism in the English language. And, how much time does that take?
Well, it depends on
How much your
how much
value-
value engineering you need to do.
Yeah.
The project was already value engineered down to the number that we had, within what we felt was a significant,
It's pretty close.
portion to move forward. It was ready to go before the project was put on pause. And that was a collaborative effort between the city and NCPRD and the consulting team to work towards that budget we had. So the sooner we have a number, the sooner we can start working towards that number.
Well, one of the things we've kind of asked them for, but we haven't gotten yet, is a, they gave us a, sort of an updated pricing estimate, but it was really just like an inflation figure. It wasn't, they hadn't gone out and done anything, they had just
They
added,
just put the Seattle construction
yeah,
index in it. And
Was it pretty significant?
sure.
yeah.
Oh, jeez.
But we asked them for a sort of component by component pricing, and that's what I'd like to see, because that will inform,
But
We might have a little, we might actually have some of that detail.
yeah, but I will tell you, I'll give you my take on value engineering.
Yeah.
There should not be significant value engineering. Okay, we went through an exhaustive process about what the community wanted. Okay, and we cannot sacrifice this gem of our city for the Parks District to put in a swing set and a picnic bench.
Yeah.
Okay, it's got to fulfill that vision of what that place is going to be. And if we get into big hurdles on price, I'm more inclined to say, okay, phase 3, we'll get this. Lower priorities, maybe go into phase 4, maybe 5, because you get what you can pay for, okay? And we can get what collectively we can afford in phase 3. And I would not want to reorient the design toward a significantly scaled down version
Yeah,
of what the.
no, just
what
extend the
community
phases.
wanted.
Like you said, extend the phase if you have to.
Yeah. That's down.
Right.
That's down.
that
the
is down the pike, and I do think the land contouring that has to happen to underlie all of those future phases is a pretty significant chunk of
Yep.
the price. Right?
There's gonna be a lot of earth moving.
Yeah.
It is a significant, we gave a lot of give to when you talk about the master IGA at this point before we finish this. And I want to recognize, we heard from our community for the last year, they want to build a park. And this is, I think, us going back to the community and saying, we're going to do whatever it takes to get this park built. So I appreciate that. And I do think this is maybe too down the line, but a conversation about is this a project that our community wants to bond over? If you have the choice between 5 phases that stretch out for the next 20 years, or you could bond for it and do it now, I think letting our community weigh in and decide.
Yeah, I would caution against too much discussion about bonding at this point, because we want to extract as much as we can from the county, quite frankly.
Plus, they're gonna be looking at bonding for their
Yeah.
system plan, right? So.
And they already lost money on the grant, so.
Couple of things to keep in mind about price schemes. One is that often when grants and proposals and funding are put together, they're put together with a certain number of amenities and a certain level of service that's going to come out of that. So it's not as simple as just saying, well, we're not going to do the bathroom, because that bathroom was required in 3 or 4 or 5 of those sources, even if one we have to reapply for. So you can change the materials, you can make reductions in some of those amenities, but striking out full amenities, it's rather cumbersome. It's not as simple as just, you gotta use a scalpel and not an axe.
Right, interesting.
In that course. The other one is that because it's a guaranteed maximum contract, the price updates that you're seeing from NCPRD, that is just the price on the books right now. It does not include any sort of contingency or things that are discovered in the field, and you're really not gonna understand that property or how much money you need until you got boots on the ground and struggles in the dirt. So I would take whatever number you're looking at, and I would add about 30% to it.
30, wow.
Well, you have a lot of market fluctuation right now. I don't know anybody that wants to make real good prognosis as to what the prices are gonna look like 6 months from now. So there's a lot of wiggle room in there. And then, yeah, I think 20% as of right now would be typically what I would want for a project this size.
Apologize, Peter. Get us back on track.
No, I think it's a good discussion though. Shall we move on?
Yeah, I think we need to.
So I think the next metric that we had there is related to Kellogg Creek restoration and dam project. And it's really sort of looking at the status of that, of the dam being the removal and the natural area restoration project. Right now, we're in a planning phase. The target is by 2027, we've got construction underway and maybe some restoration underway as that project progresses. Certainly some uncertainty with funding and all those sorts of things out there. Any thoughts on that as a metric? Does that feel good?
Can I say, I think we've all read each of these metrics.
Okay.
Can we comment on all of them at once, or do you want to go?
No, let's go metric by metric.
Okay.
Let's go metric by metric. They each warrant their own discussion. So this one, I would just say that, it feels to me like, oh, there's not much for these years before 2027, but actually, reading the update report that Neil sent around yesterday, or I think it was yesterday, they are going out for grants for some restoration work along the shoreline and stuff. So there are some pieces, I guess, that we might be able to plug into. But there's not gonna be, there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff going on that Joseph's part of and, that this working group is part of, but there's not gonna be a ton for us to be working on, I guess. I don't know.
Well, I think the work for us is going to be to, maintain visibility amongst all the stakeholders so that we can keep the funding and the grants viable and coming. Because people forget, and so.
Yeah, it's making a project advocate for sure.
Yeah, that's really most of our role here.
I think the other thing is, that project's sort of still in its bigger discovery due diligence phase too. And, even now they're identifying components that come with a cost that maybe weren't really realized early on. Right? So we've got sanitary sewers that cross the water, right?
More than one? I thought we had.
Just one.
Okay.
But
We've known
it's-
that one.
Yeah,
For a
but
while.
it's probably a little bit more expensive than we anticipated.
Oh, really? Okay.
On how to deal with that.
Is that our line or is
It is
that
our
Wes's line?
Sounds like it was on.
Next one, resident satisfaction with city parks. Number of residents reporting being very or somewhat satisfied with access to parks in Milwaukie through our biannual community survey. I think the latest data point was November 2023 at 77% satisfied. Pretty healthy. I think our target is to continue an upward trend in satisfaction.
I will tell you that this is good news, but I will tell you that I think that, my personal feeling on this is that most of the residents, quite frankly, don't expect a lot from the parks. And so I think that the bar might get raised as they see more things like the 3 parks that just went in and all the amenities that go with that. And,
And what gets built at Concord?
Yeah. I just think that the expectations will rise with success.
Well, and it'll be interesting to see, like that last survey was before
the parks were opened.
It was before those parks were open, for sure, November 2023, but it was really before a lot of people had engaged on the system plan too, which kind of prompted people to think about. So it'll be interesting to see, yeah, if those things together and the opening of Concord this fall, challenge, do raise that bar. I think that's.
But I think that satisfaction is based mostly on parks and not really on recreation activities.
Well, and I would also mention that Adam had done quite a lot of engagement,
Yeah.
working with the community about parks. And so there was certainly the excitement that had been developed as we were working to construct the three parks.
If I can jump in on that one, the last biennial survey actually had 3 questions about parks. We asked about satisfaction with maintenance of parks, amenities in parks, and access to parks. What we're showing here, that 77% was specifically about the access, but we could include all 3 of those if those are all elements you would like to track, longitudinal data on.
Maintenance.
It was maintenance, I believe it was maintenance, amenities, and access.
Yeah.
So we'll add those other 2 to that.
Yeah, and I mean, access kind of dovetails with your next
Yeah.
bullet, but, yeah.
Yeah, so the next one was residents living within a 10-minute walk of an accessible green space or park. And we spent a little bit of time going back and forth on this one. I think we originally started off with like a half mile, because that was some of the existing data that we'd already seen. And I think maybe in the comp plan, there's some.
Well, you had
Maps.
produced a map at one point, is it in
Yeah.
the comp plan? Yeah, I remember
Yeah.
the map that's the quarter mile and
I think
shows us where the gaps are.
Yeah, so we have that, and then we originally had it down as managed green space or parks, but we ended up settling, I think when we met with Councilor Massey, to change managed to accessible. So, green spaces that, in terms of accessibility, people can go there and do perhaps passive recreation. We're not looking at, in terms of green spaces, so we think of like, the Pennywood facility.
The Willow Place,
The Willow
yeah.
Place facility there that we've gone in and we've, created a trail, so sort of a quiet place people can walk through and, we've done some restoration work in there. So
Have we
people,
put benches in there or anything?
no, haven't put any benches in there, but that's what we're thinking of in terms of accessibility, that type of stuff.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Peter, it's what we also liked about accessible over managed is it might not be managed by us, but we
Right.
still want to count it. If there's green space that is owned by a local nonprofit or like that still helps our broader goal of Milwaukeeans having access to green space.
And we even when Adam and I were actually talking about this morning, we may have green space that's within that quarter mile or 10-minute walk that's outside of Milwaukie, Mill Park, for example, on Linwood or Arrow Heights. Those are parks that are within 10-minute walk of some of our residents in the community. So looking at that access as well, even though we might not manage it.
Well, and I do think that, before NCPRD launched the system plan, I had always seen it as just the, quarter mile or half mile, whatever size the circles are. I do think that walk shed thing that they did is really good because you can have a park like North Clackamas Park. If you draw a circle, it includes a lot of people on the other side of 224 that we don't necessarily want to be encouraging to walk across 224. So, I mean, I do think, thinking about what the walk shed is, what a reasonably and safe walk is an important, change from that traditional just circle analysis. Yeah.
We wanted to use the same methodology this year for the PSP.
Yeah.
I was going to say that's exactly what the TSP has, but I do appreciate you going, the TSP doesn't include, they have schools as like a separate facility and their green space definition is not as expansive. And I do think that more expansive look helps take into account my neighborhood. We've got Century Park. I live on 30th, the closest park to me, and it is in the back of El Puente Elementary. And so taking into account all of those things, I think is valuable.
Yeah, I mean, Adam had put together a list actually. These other smaller natural areas that we have, detention facilities, perhaps similar to the Willow Place, Cemetery, the Pioneer Cemeteries at Greenspace.
Do you count areas like, I think about, as we were saying, green space, the two things that came to mind. One is in our city, the trolley trail, especially along the like orange line where it parallels, feels like a green space.
We do. I mean, we've got that identified trails as perhaps a linear type park, right? Trolley trail, the Springwater corridor.
And that's probably the exception, that stretch of the trolley trail there that is in Milwaukie is probably the exception to the rule that we own our own parks, because I think it's PRD owns that.
They do.
So, the challenge with these next two metrics is not doing the calculations. It's actually deciding which properties you include. Does a church property count? What about a school property? Does it matter if it's only after hours and the weekends? Do trails count? Because there's a significant amount of acreage in trails. But it's really only usable for walking or transportation because it's a linear park in many cases. And so add what would be very helpful for staff like me who are going to be doing this calculation is having an idea of what we include and what we don't. And I'm not sure who's responsible for breaking down that list, but that's the list that we're going to have to come up with. And these are the questions that come up. What are parks is easy to define. What are the accessible green spaces that we have? We have a good idea of that. It's when you start to get into some of these questions that you'll start to see the numbers in these next two reasons.
Yeah.
Well, and I guess, it'd probably be useful next quarter or whatever to have a map and to really sit down and go into the map and talk about that. I will throw out a couple of examples. The schools are generally open to their grounds being used outside of school hours, so maybe we do count them. I know there's a church on Lake Road called Immovable Foundation, and I was on the planning commission when they came in for something about 2010 or so. And they have a lot of green space, and it was area that the Lake Road neighborhood had used and had been welcome to use under the previous owner of that property, which may have been the school district. Or the education service district. The church really made it off limits. They do no longer welcome people to use it. So I think it is going to vary property by property.
Yeah. But we'll take a look at those different options and we can report back on what that would look like.
Yeah, it's just to talk about the complexity of this, like the Presbyterian Church, where Dickie Wick's offices are. They have a nice little area behind the Presbyterian Church with some trails, and there's some benches back there along the Kellogg Creek and everything like that. It's great.
And they totally welcome people.
As long as you don't have a pet.
No pets. Okay.
I got busted.
I do like,
Adam mentioned the next one sort of links in with the 10-minute walk shed of accessible green space, parks and accessible green space area. So we're looking at acres of developed park or accessible green space. And Adam and I have had a conversation with it yesterday with Metro. They have some dollars available for property acquisition. That'll maybe work through part of this community choice grant process that maybe we can take advantage of, so.
I do think that acquisition or that accessible green, I've been dealing with it a lot. We've been getting a lot about co-housing along King Road. And one of the things they say is we have no sidewalks in our neighborhood, we have nothing that we can walk to, and yet people are parking on this. we need a car to be able to get around and stuff. I think it's hard to, middle housing is coming to Milwaukie, and it's hard to tell our residents that they no longer can have the same access to on-street parking without providing like amenities that are actually walkable for them. So I do think that this work throughout our city, that acquisition is going to be really, really important. Milwaukie Bay Park, I think, is an important first part, but that second element, the Greenspace goal. And I think flip side for the economic development fund, like making sure, we talked last time about paralleling this watershed goal with the watershed goal for economic development. And I think that stands there. What does it look like to have walkable neighborhoods? I think our residents are going to be asking that of us a lot more aggressively, which I think is fair.
The next one we had was investments made to enhance green space and recreational opportunities. And when I was putting this together, I was looking at how can we use our Good Neighbor program. If you recall, Good Neighbor program is get about $145,000 a year from West. It's $1 per EDU that we were able to use in a more expanded geographical region along some of our riparian corridors. And I've shown the map to, I think, everybody before, but we have this funding that we can use in terms of, it's more geographically expanded and the use is more expansive. And there are recreational opportunities, open space opportunities that we can use those dollars for. We just opened up an application period starting in March, I think March 15th, that NDAs, nonprofits, and the city can apply for funding. Got about $370,000 available right now with some more money coming in the next fiscal year that we'll try to make good use for. That application period closes June 30th, and then we're going to review those applications with the Community Utility Advisory Committee in August, and then make a recommendation that we'll bring to council in terms of how we want to spend this money.
And so that's like a once every 3 years kind of cycle, is that what you're?
Well, we're gonna do it annually. So
Oh, annually.
I've got this application period that ends in June, and then I'm gonna start one up in the fall again. And so we want to have it a fall cycle, but I wanted to get that moving along. I think though, what we'll look here though, is as those applications that are focused on parks and green space, because there are some that, could be some applications that we might approve that don't necessarily have a neat side to parks and green space. There could be a public education and outreach piece that deals more with water quality or something like that, stormwater. We'll try to link those to this goal.
So, I wanted to circle back to what Adam said about, maybe this is a good place to talk about community choice grants a little bit, talk about that process. And, I mean, when you say you guys talk to Metro and they have some money, is that money, you mean in that program because they have a pot, or do they have separate acquisition money do they have separate parks? Park acquisition money outside of the community choice grants?
So they have $2 to $3 million to spend on parks or natural space enhancements and amenities. Those are broken down into grants of $250,000 with a 1/3 match. Those are going to be identified by community members. Sometimes those projects are going to community members, I want this here. Whereas it might be the community member saying, I really want this. And they're coming back to us as the jurisdictional partner and saying, hey, we've heard from community members that they want to have this sort of amenity in their neighborhood. We noticed you have a park space there. We want to help you do that. What they found in the first go around of this community choice is that when they were speaking with residents, there was also the requirement for acquisition of property. If there isn't a park or a green space in my neighborhood or that I can safely walk to, yes, it's close to me, but it's across the expressway. And so they announced just a couple weeks ago that they have $15 million that they will be using to help achieve the goals that are identified in the Community Choice Nature and Neighborhoods program. That is a program that Milwaukie, NCPRD, Oregon City, Gladstone, and sort of the unincorporated areas around those cities. There's more that I'm forgetting. Wes is on there. Happy Valley is not partnered on it. But it's a narrow corridor. Everyone is welcome to submit an idea online right now. And as they work further through the process, they'll start to be matching these projects that get voted on by the community to actual properties. And so they have $2-3 million for amenities, and they have up to $15 million for acquisition. The conversation that we had with them was, hey, if we start hearing from residents that we need to purchase more land, then it turns out there might be some in Milwaukie, city of Milwaukie aren't interested. And so that was the course of the conversation. I don't know if that answered the question.
Oh, no, I mean, that was.
There's
that was
two
definitely
pots, 2
part
to 3 million.
in a separate, okay. Yeah, no, that definitely answered that question. I guess I've seen some of the stuff on the community choice grants. I know there's a meeting here in this building on June 1.
Mhm.
Is that meeting to still be soliciting ideas, or is that a meeting where people are gonna be somehow voting?
So there are 3 upcoming workshops. The second one is here on June 1st. Those workshops will be Metro's team of park planners and landscape architects going through and doing the sort of planning exercise to solicit ideas or think about ideas. They'll also be doing some really cool different cultural sort of activities that are based on experts and real real opportunities to participate in some of the different indigenous cultures. And then they will also be interviewing residents at that time. So the short answer is they are still in the project gathering phase. Anyone can suggest a project online, or you can come to one of these 3 workshops, and that will be like a planning exercise, similar to what we had in the parks during our open houses for these 3 parks. Then through the summer will be the voting phase. Anyone over the age of 11 can vote online for projects. And then getting into the fall and winter, they'll be matching up those ideas with the jurisdictional partners. And then we'll be looking at, winter and spring to start to implement. And these would be 5-year grants, 2 years of planning are allowed, and then 3 years of implementation.
That's helpful, I didn't understand that.
Some of the information is coming out as it's developed with our partnership group as we start to develop the program. So we have flyers that include all the workshops and that encourage people to go online. And then we also have like the frequently asked questions, and we can share that with all of you. And that frequently asked questions really breaks down the process very well.
And then I think we talked just before we started this, we're gonna add something about tree canopy. We'll work on something there for another metric. Are there any other?
Well, I don't know if it's a metric, but it's a conversation that we should have under the umbrella, I guess, of this goal, which is we had a business owner, Joseph, and the council president and I had a meeting with the business owner, namely the owner of Sauna Glow, who's interested in placing a sauna facility in one of our parks. And I think it's not just a conversation about his proposal, but a conversation generally about whether and under what parameters we would engage in those sort of public-private partnerships in our parks. We have a history of having tried, not uber successfully, but having tried leasing, having pop-up usage of, somebody renting paddleboards and stuff in Milwaukie Bay Park. But that wasn't an actual structure or anything permanent in the park. That was just kind of pop-up. This kind of proposal would probably be more than that. And so, I think we promised to bring that dialogue to council and try and get to some, and I guess I'm looking at Joseph and the council president too.
I think of this also, if I can rope in a few other things. We've got Fernberg Park and how our NDAs engage in our parks. I think it's that larger conversation of like, okay, if an entity that is not the city wants to add something to our parks, be it a commercial activity, be it an NDA, what is our process for allowing that feedback? And I think it's also like a separate but kind of related thread is I think we've all spoken with the Parks Foundation about their role in the city and as a fundraiser to support our parks. Like, how do we, maybe larger than that, like engage community stakeholders in our parks, not just for improvements, but also in support our parks. I'm seeing from that meeting, people are really interested in our parks as a space for community and want to be able to invest more in amenities that will bring people there. How do we kind of channel that energy in a productive way through a process?
Yeah, so we do have on the action plan side on the other sheet, some language there that focuses on this amenity request for parks and how do we handle those internally. And it's one of the things that Adam is working through, developing sort of that standard operating procedure for how do we handle these requests internally? What are the steps that we go through? But in terms of the public-private partnership, you're looking at some sort of metric there? Is that what
Well, I'm just looking for us to have that conversation. I don't know that it's a metric that we're counting over
Okay.
3 years, because hopefully we have a conversation and we resolve it this year.
Yeah,
I
I think
would-
it goes well in an action item. Yeah,
I would propose, thanks, Peter, so what we have in this quarter, staff working on that internal park amenity request SOP, but then I think bringing that to council next quarter and having a conversation where you can invite some of these business partners and others, and I think we can maybe even invite NCPRD to that conversation too, to talk about this broad, so that you can give broader policy direction to us on what you would like us to give green lights to or no green lights to, and how you want to be involved in that process.
Yeah. Perfect.
I
one
think
thing,
this is a great discussion. Isn't NCPRD in the driver's seat on this?
On that public-private partnership piece, they're certainly involved, they'd be involved in it, under our current IGA. I think there's some language in the current cooperative IGA that allows, both the city and the park district to do programming. So if we're looking at these
I was just thinking about,
private
isn't
partnership as
it
programming.
NCPRD the insurance provider?
Another thing that it is, that the cooperative IGA talks about,
Okay, I
so
won't go down there.
I think it is a top,
Apologize.
I think it is a topic to be discussed in our cooperative IGA negotiations.
with our goal around tree canopy, we narrow it there into just public lands. And I wonder if we just have our tree canopy goal somehow enumerated there, and then we could disaggregate by total city, public owned lands.
We have that breakdown. One of the challenges is the frequency of the data, how frequently we get the data. It feels like it's not like an every 5-year cycle. But we can certainly track that, and, we're like 2014, 2019, the next set is the 2024. We're getting ready to get from Metro.
Okay.
we're developing that canopy measure there.
I agree with you. However, I would just caution that I think that we can take more concrete steps on land that we control, have access to, et cetera, or can enter into agreements with schools or churches or whatever. We're not going to have, it's going to be hard to develop metrics for just residential properties. Now, that doesn't say that we can't promote it, but I think it's just going to be difficult to set goals in that slice of the pie.
Yeah.
80% of our canopies are private. So, the other
80%
80,
is
yeah, it's roughly 80-20.
residential,
Yeah, or private property.
private.
It's actually probably a little bit more residential, if you look at all residential.
And I do think that's why I kind of say disaggregating, we look at overall tree coverage disaggregated by public lands, privately held lands. We can't control the privately held lands as much, and we would expect to see more aggressive targets in our publicly held lands. But I do think like a facet of the development we're seeing in the city is like, what is happening with our privately held lands in the city of Milwaukie as regards to tree canopy and our larger goal?
Yeah.
And how, I know we got public comment about our tree code. If we are coming in and tweaking, I think having a goal around private tree canopy or including that as a component is valuable lens.
Yeah, and we have a tool online, actually. It's called Branch Out Milwaukie. The data's from 2019 data. But you can look at individual parcels and see what the canopy coverage is as of 2019. We're looking at getting that updated as Katie's working on their, the urban forest equity implementation plan. One of the things that we're doing there is updating that tool at Branch Out Milwaukie tool as well. I like including that in there. Are there any other metrics? Any other thoughts on metrics? Got a long list of implementation partners.
And per the conversation or the comment by the mayor, I did add on here business groups, including the Downtown Alliance of Milwaukie, the Chamber and Business of Milwaukie, and individual businesses who might be involved in that public-private partnership conversation.
Yeah, I guess the one proposal about a sauna is the only proposal I've heard for the more permanent use or facility, but obviously a lot of people are interested in events, holding events.
Mhm.
And all that, so.
With the sauna, is the sauna proposal like just a temporary sauna or is it?
Well, I think he's,
Okay.
no, I think he's looking to do something more permanent.
He described, we talked at First Friday, he was saying his new idea is something that's floating on the water that is docked or attached to Elk Rock Island. That's not when. So
Yeah, it's a lot of liability questions right there.
Yeah. His original, I do think there's a ton of hurdles to his idea and turning floodplain and we'll have a greenway planning and blah, blah, blah. But it seems like a conversation to have about parks generally, because it could be North Clackamas Park, right? It could be some other park where somebody wants to do something that doesn't have so many hurdles. And his example that he used when he asked for this meeting was like concessionaires in the state parks, like at Silver Falls, there's a lodge or whatever. I do think that's a little bit different than a city park. I don't know if any cities around us have something like this in their park system. I'd be curious to learn that. The bigger park system like Tualatin Hills, do they have any sort of public-private partnerships at any of their facilities? Some of the parks have, it could be something where we want it, right? Like, we want a archery facility, or we want something that for kids to, some sort of activity or or sport thing and we want to partner with it.
I mean, one of the things that I've seen are concessions that are sold at, ball fields and things like that. And often those have, private groups, running concessions for fundraising and things like that.
So, I mean, I don't want us to get too focused on the sauna idea, but have a more general conversation about where we think it's appropriate, or do we think it's appropriate and under what conditions?
And I think, Emma, you added something in the sort of the action plan piece.
I think one thing to think about as you do this is just, we've purposely picked the term accessible green spaces in parks. And if we are putting things in our parks that are fee-based, that limits accessibility. And so we might just want to, and we've also had another citywide goal on affordability. And so if we are putting in amenities in our parks that you have to pay to use, we might want to be prepared if we get some pushback from the community that says, like, hey, there's the park over here for me, and then there's a park over here or this amenity over here for people who can afford it. So you just might want to have that kind of conversation, because that is something that we've run into in places that I've worked or done work for in the past, is what is the line of sponsorship or private use of public facilities. And parks and probably our libraries are probably some of the fewest places that exist, or the places that exist where anybody can use it and not be expected to buy anything. Our parks and libraries, and that's about it.
Yeah.
You go stand in the street without being expected to buy two, I guess, but that's about it.
I appreciate you bringing that up, actually. Was there a discussion on charging or something like that?
I don't know what the discussion was. This is the first time I'm hearing about it. It's just in places that I've worked in the past,
Yeah.
there have been ideas of, oh, you say you have parkland that you're having trouble maintaining and you want some money for some amenities over here.
Yeah.
Well, let me do this with my business over here, and don't worry, people can pay a small fee to still access it.
Yeah.
And in my last city, we kind of thought about that. We said, no, if we're putting in amenities in our parks, we're going to make sure that they're accessible to everybody regardless of cost, that they're going to be free. And that's just a conversation that we as Milwaukie will kind of have to have.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, I totally get your point, and I agree with a lot of it, but not everything is free, right? Using the aquatic center is not free. You're paying a fee. I mean, where's that line between something that's, so if you wanted to put I don't know why I keep using archery, but I remember Washington Park used to have a section that was set out for archery. If you wanted to have some kind of, whether it's a club, or, whether it's a business or it's just, a club, there might be some kind of fee, but it wouldn't be exclusionary, I guess, in terms of who could. Sauna is kind of exclusionary because only, 4 people can go or whatever. Anyway, I just think, there may be times where we want to promote the use of our parks for some sort of activity that should have some kind of fee. I wouldn't say never have a fee, I guess. I think there's a difference, yeah.
Yeah, I guess the two examples that I could think of, a paddleboard vendor is like an additive experience that costs money. You're selling your thing, but it's a component that like adds to the capacity of what the park can be. And I think of like Milwaukie Days. If we had a festival of some type with some carnies on Milwaukie Day Park in the future, like that's an experience where like you're probably gonna pay a fee to go ride the Ferris wheel or go toss some rings at some bottles, but that's like an additive experience. And I think like those lines are some conversations that we can hammer out, come back and bring this back to council.
Maybe moving on to the action roadmap. I think on the side there, as a reminder, we've got sort of what the focus is for the year, 2025, get Milwaukie Bay Park back on track, secure funding for Kellogg Creek Restoration Project. And then we've got it broken down by quarter for staff and council actions on the right there. A couple things we've already accomplished, we sort of checked off. So we did submit a funding ask to the state legislature for Milwaukie Bay Park. We've launched our Good Neighbor program. Do you feel like there's, I've mentioned that, one of the things that Adam's been thinking about working on is this internal park amenity request and standard operating procedure. So we have some structure to how we handle these requests moving forward. And, it'll take some work, also some collaboration with NCPRD on that. We're also looking at, different funding scenarios for Milwaukie Bay Park, trying to figure out how we might potentially come up with other funds. So what are other fund sources out there? And, we've been working with NCPRD specifically right now on maintenance of the 3 new parks, some of the issues that have popped up from there, but it's also we're also involving them how we're reintegrating from, the construction projects to get them to manage the projects and continue the maintenance. We talked a little bit about moving forward with this operational updates to the cooperative IGA as well. So we're hopefully getting ready to have some meetings with staff meetings there this quarter. The goal being by June, we have a Adjourn outfit. So we made some substantial progress on. And then on the council side, we're working towards completing this goal action plan. Making sure that council's articulating their parks and green space priorities. We're doing that here. We're going through this process here. And I think, with Councilor Massey as the liaison to PARB, we have that interaction with PARB to further that conversation. The 2-on-2 meetings that you're having with the commissioners are helping, and we're getting ready to go through an interview process for filling PARB vacancies as well. So, I think last time, Joe, let you sort of take a look at these. Are there anything that you feel that's missing from your perspective on the staff side or the council side?
I think that these are good, but I also think that they kind of have to be, we have to look at these and, I had this discussion when we had our first meeting on this thing, is that I think that, we have to identify a very specific task person each one of those goals. Otherwise, it's kind of gets too cloudy.
Yeah.
And so, I think one of the big things that, that we're going to do is the park, because that hasn't happened yet. Just this information, Next actions are passed. Kind of have to break it down. Mentality here, otherwise you kind of have this lofty action roadmaps that in the corner you can say, what did we get done?
I do think related to that, for the council actions, when you're coming back every quarter, give an update, that might be a valuable time also for us to say, who's taking point on what, and decide. The NDA roadshow, is that something that we're asking for staff help on? Is that something we're leading? If we're leading it, who's leading that? Figuring out those types of specific things would be really valuable.
Well, I think that I just want to make sure I'm clear, as I see, I agree with you.
Yeah.
But I think that that's the council liaison and the staff leads brings that to this body, and gives you a report on what's been done, rather than the entire council getting involved in how it's done, when it's done, et cetera. I think that you pass judgment on we're making good progress or we're not, and that kind of thing. But I think for efficiency purposes, you put trust in me, to lead this effort as the council liaison and that kind of thing. And then when we come back, we show you that progress are.
Well, or maybe you ask for, a roadshow to NDAs, you don't necessarily want to go on all NDAs. You want to share that.
I don't know.
I think
Okay.
what might be valuable is you come, if we are leaning into our liaisons like that, you come with a report on what's been done and a perspective, like, here's what needs to be done in these next few months. Here's how I'd like to propose how we go forward with that, if that makes sense. You could say, these things need to, I like your point. If these are duties unassigned, they're duties that won't get done. And I also think that the less we do here that's coming up with stuff from scratch, the more we review something that's actually had some thought into it at the start, the better it is. So maybe it's the liaison job to say, we have council actions. Here's what I envision those council actions look like. Here's who can plug in. Say, yep, that looks good every quarter, so we know our marching orders for each goal.
I guess I will just say on that specific one, I try to, if I find myself on a Wednesday night with something to do, I sometimes just go spontaneously to an NDA meeting. Not a lot of things to be on Wednesday night. I try to make every NDA once a year. That's always been my goal, and it fell off during COVID, but I kind of got back to it this last year. I'm not going to promise not to talk about parks and green spaces, I guess, when I go.
Not asking you not to.
Okay.
Okay. I actually had something on here related to the urban forest equity implementation plan, and I don't see it there anymore, but that was something that we had talked about collaborating with Katie on and working on that project in Q3 and Q4 as that project gets developed.
Peter, I think that's my fault. I had to find a Word version of this very fast before the meeting so I could edit it, and I probably pulled an old one. So
Okay.
we'll make sure that's added on.
Yeah. And that links back into this canopy.
Absolutely.
The canopy component. We'll flesh that out a little bit more as well on some of those actions.
Well, and we may hear something shortly on Kellogg that changes something we
Sure.
have in here. You have so Kellogg here several times, so, yeah.
So the focus this year is getting Milwaukie Park back on track, securing funding. The 2026, we're working towards developing a Greenspace strategy, Greenspace management plan. And then in 2027, future, clarifying the future of Milwaukie Parks governance. And the big things that we put things on. And as things continue working with NCPRD and developing the cooperative IGA and funding, maybe there'll be some things that switch.
Couple things I just want to mention, to the conversation we just had about, the role of the liaison and the preparation for the next quarter. I think you see naturally in these action plans, it gets sparser and sparser as you scroll down. That's just because we don't have a crystal ball to predict the future. But I think our plan is we will work with each liaison in the lead up to the next quarterly update to make sure that both the current quarter and the next quarter are better fleshed out, and then really be getting both that status update and workshopping what work needs to come next. The second thing I just want to mention, I've spent a lot of time with the cooperative IGA of late. And one thing it mentions is the NDA, or sorry, the NCPRD director coming to speak to council on an annual basis, which I don't believe has happened since I've worked at the city of Milwaukee, but that'd be something I'd recommend keeping in the update to the cooperative IGA.
Yeah, actually, it definitely hasn't happened since Kia's been the director. I do feel like Michael Bork maybe came once, came twice. He definitely came to meet council when he was new. I feel like he came a second time, but
I remember the previous director coming and sort of giving a broader update of what they're doing as a district. That's
yeah, I think we should invite, and I like that idea.
I mean, particularly for these 3 years when you have Parks and Greenspace as a goal, they as your parks, operator and maintainer, it feels very important that they be a part of these conversations in some way.
I know one of the other things I was asking about too, that we talking about the metrics, how we're measuring success. I know when Joseph was talking about economic development, there are other things that you want to we weren't measuring success, but just things that you were interested in. Was there anything in terms of parks that?
Well, I mean, my head keeps going back to the map and like we were talking about, identifying the gap analysis. You've got the work you've done, you've got the work NCPRD's done for the system plan, you've got the TSP work. So there's sort of three things to cross-check there about getting us to a gap analysis and tying that to the equity too. Like, we may have gaps, but are they, which gaps are better serve an equity perspective, I guess. Addressing which gaps first better address an equity.
Would you want to monitor anything about events or programming in parks? I say that more as a monitor rather than being a metric of success, because I think, when we do close down a park for an event, not necessarily saying it's better or worse than when it's just open for recreation. But I think it'd be interesting thing to monitor how many NCPRD sponsored or put on events are happening in Milwaukee every year, and what's the trend line there? How many requests for permits are we getting from the public to host events?
That'd be useful.
Yeah.
I mean, I will tell you, I know NCPRD's number is going way down. They used to do more concerts and more movies in their parks, and that has diminished a lot the last few years. But yeah, I think the public applications would be great, and the NCPRD, yeah. And I do feel like, I don't know that it's a measure, but I do feel like there's some conversations to be had with the school district as well. Around Wichita, different school grounds, around those tennis courts at Llewellyn that could be pickleball courts, et cetera. So, yeah.
I also have I don't know if it's really related to metrics or more just an action question, but was approached at Earth Day by a couple community members who brought up some conversations they'd had with the previous city manager about community garden space. That I was really glad they talked to me about, because I hadn't heard about them. I'm gonna connect with staff and we'll reach back out. But I just wanted to know from council's perspective, how you think, if you think about community gardens in this conversation, how important that is to you, if you've got any things to share or things you want staff thinking about in terms of community gardens in our broader green space strategy.
Well, I know Adam and Peter know about this because there was, the old plan for Balfour had community gardens at the front of Balfour. And there was a lot of disappointment, among certain people when those came out of that plan. yeah, what is the city's role in community gardens? I think that's a conversation to have.
I think that fits in with that, sort of that green space strategy. I would like to have a conversation in our next work session about this. Like, what does that mean when we talk about green space strategy? What does that mean to council? So we'll have, maybe we have a discussion like that.
I do know, I think there are two community gardens that I know of. I mean, Providence has their own, garden behind the hospital, but there are two sort of open for anybody to get a plot, community gardens. And I think the one on the ground of the Campbell School is pretty solid and pretty well established. The one that Lisa Ashbrook operates on the grounds of that church on Linwood, I understand the church is looking to build housing there. So its days may be numbered. And so, yeah, I think.
And there are also, I believe, some community garden spaces behind Hillside Manor.
And behind Milwaukie Community Center, yes, both of those are true.
And we have been talking to the Housing Authority about that green space behind Hillside and how that connects into our city green space strategy. So I think particularly because of the proximity to Balfour, that might be a very interesting parcel.
Last I knew, they were fully subscribed, though. They were pretty full.
I think, and I'll let Joseph cut me off if I'm not supposed to say this, but I think there's broader conversations about the city's role in that broader green space, and so maybe opportunities for expansion.
Doesn't Waverly, and it's private, but doesn't Waverly Apartments have a community garden?
They do, a few of the apartment complexes do.
Yeah.
Chestnut might have one too, yeah.
The one at Waverly is pretty big.
They got it cut in half for the way it's building, but it's still pretty big, yeah.
Community gardens and healing gardens are one of the specific things that are called out in those Metro Community Choice Grants. So any residents that you're talking about who are interested in community gardens
Okay,
should definitely
Connect the
participate
dots.
okay.
in the Community Choice Nature Neighbors Program for Metro. The other thing to think about is, one of the only metrics that we have in here is the revolves around just land. Do we own accessible park or green space land by you? Levels of service, and not to be too much of a planner here, but levels of service can be broken down to every single amenity. Not every park is the same, not every green space is the same, you all know that. But I think that as we maybe move forward, we might think about, well, are there certain amenities that people should be able to walk to as well? For example, is it enough to just be able to walk to a piece of land, or does that piece of land have to have a drinking fountain, or a playground, or a community garden, or a sauna? You pick it, like, we can break that down. So the state does have metrics that it recommends. There are all sorts of different levels of service for acreage, or all sorts of different levels of service for amenities, all the way down to picnic tables. That should be something that NCPRD is looking at in their system plan. So not to repeat the process, but should there be other metrics that you want to look at other than just land? And one of them, I think, that kind of rings out is it's like playgrounds. Well, and then is it just playgrounds, or is it a playgrounds with like a unitary safety surface, right? Poured in place or rubberized safety surface that you could take a walker or a wheelchair or stroller on? Or is, engineered with fiber and mulch, playground mulching off? Like, we can break it down as far as you want to go. We just have to have time to collect the data and run the calculations. So that is something to think about if you're looking for more metrics, is there a metric beyond just acreage and land?
So are these state levels of recommended levels of service, or is that digestible information, or is it in a 500-page book?
I've digested it. Yeah, so the state every year, they put together what is called the SCORP, which is a statewide planning effort and that is what that's what state grants are based on. And they have recommendations for levels of service, and they have actually done the calculations for levels of service. They're data is a little bit dated from what I've seen. So, a couple years ago, I went through all that and updated it. It's state comp free.
Score,
Score.
awful acronym.
I think that's a great point of departure. I'd love to get a link to that.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what happens.
I got it, yeah.
Yeah, I'll check out the score.
The other thing I'm thinking that this, that the discussion of community gardens has triggered in my head is, I think it would be useful before the next quarter for somebody to read through the comp plan and think about what things in the comp plan, what goals in the comp plan are not being worked on by other departments. And, and does the goal say anything, does the comp plan say anything about community gardens? I don't remember, I expected it, but I don't remember that. One thing it does talk about, I know, and I'm not sure how we fit it into this, but is, connectivity of green spaces, wildlife connectivity and habitat connectivity of green spaces.
That's certainly one of the things that I and Katie have actually talked about is how do we incorporate some of that, like you said, there's policy language, like, how does that fit into this larger green space strategy? So we have started mulling that over.
Great.
Anything else?
Anything else, anyone? We're ready to move to Kellogg. I'm not seeing anything, so I guess, thank you guys.
Thanks.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
guys very much. Yeah,
Thank you.
right. Next topic is an update on the Kellogg Creek Restoration and Dam Removal Project. Joseph Brilio, our Assistant City Manager, and Neil Foreman, and, oh, and, okay, and Mandy, and. It's the whole, it's the whole.
Partnerships. Working out here.
Good evening, Mayor, Council President. We're here to, I'm Joseph Brilio, here with our partners from Nick and Mandy Hurd, who's our development project manager, and we thought, it's been a couple months, probably been over 6 months since we've had any kind of real update about Kellogg and what's been going on, and there's been a lot of moving parts. All the moving parts have to work in some sort of concert. We have 4 partners, which we'll go over again. And a lot has changed in the last 6 months too. Over the last 12 to 18 months, I'd say, we've been making an amazing amount of strides, and the momentum was feeling like it's going to happen no matter what. Time. January came around, and the changes at the federal level have certainly caused challenges. One of those being, if you looked at the status updates back in February, we had full intention to apply for grants from the Federal Highway Administration, but they turned off that grant to review it. So those are things that are happening. Lines and grants and funding opportunities we once thought would be there, at least we could be competitive for, are no longer there. So now we're trying to pivot and rethink of fundraising strategies and how we do this. But I would say overall, I think we're still very optimistic that this project is going to make its way through. It just might take a lot more creativity, a lot more leverage, partnerships, a lot more conversations with our electeds at the state and federal level, for sure. Before I give it over to Neil and Amy to kind of share some of the latest updates of the project, I just wanted to also let you know that we also anticipate inviting April from American Rivers and ODOT to also sometime this summer. Potentially also provide you updates and just, I love these guys. You see them quite a bit, but I don't think you get to see the other part. Be kind of good just for face recognition and also to get just other perspectives. And then finally, before, just let you know what Mandy and I are kind of involved in. So I'm part of the leadership team of this partnership and this cooperative project. So a lot of our interests, these interests, are what I'm navigating in our meetings, also just making sure are addressed. And then from the technical side, Mandy's more of the technical lead on those meetings and playing quarterback and connecting city services, city professionals with other project technical experts to make sure that barriers are lowered and that the project continues to move forward as fast as possible. So it's a constant, again, a lot of moving parts, but I feel like we have created a pretty amazing team. A lot of shots and a lot of amazing work already done, so with that, I know 30 minutes. But Neil has a PowerPoint, so.
Yeah, and this is a pretty high level PowerPoint, and we can really just have a kind of discussion. Again, there's been a lot of activity, and then there's obviously what's been going on the federal level. I always repeat the fact that this is kind of the best project to work on for me in terms of both the combination of community benefit and stream benefit, and just seeing every day like the middle school kids and the high school kids monitoring macroinvertebrates, and then seeing the team that we have assembled, and all of those things are in one project is really rare. So I'll just kind of talk through this, but really these are the 4 lead partners, obviously the city and us. American Rivers is the holder of the NOAA Fisheries Grant, and April McEwen recently spun off, who you will see in July. She recently spun off from American Rivers to being her own consultant, but she's still playing exactly the same role in the project, basically. So her email address has changed, but that's about it. And then obviously ODOT is the owner of the dam and the bridge. Then there's a whole array of about 26 other partners involved in everything from, again, the schools involved in the monitoring, the different agencies that are part of the technical advisory committee, the 3 tribes that are involved. From there. So my eyes are getting old, so I'm gonna kind of spin around halfway, but project status is we are in the kind of phase 2 final design. We're working toward a design acceptance package, which, and Amy's in on the design meetings, I'm not, I'll let her kind of articulate that when we get to it. Again, we've raised $27 million, 15 from NOAA Fisheries, 10 from Metro, 1 from kind of a hodgepodge of sources, and 1 from the city. As Joseph mentioned, we were basically halfway through a big, roughly $50 million application in February to the Protect program, when they just kind of closed it early with no explanation. And we are kind of really trying to stay in touch with the delegation about like, okay, that was authorized, this falls into that bucket of things that were law and authorized by Congress and signed by the president, and hypothetically, you don't get to just say you don't want to do them. The workforce development stuff is obviously going strong with the macroinvertebrate monitoring and working with the middle school and high school, and the PSU teaching assistantships, and that has obviously enormous growth potential. Key things to think about, talk through, the community engagement side, the fundraising side, the partnership and the coordination with the city, and final design and monitoring. And I'll just go start going through that. So the timeline is, again, we are in this kind of final design permitting fundraising phase. If all goes the way we want to, we get to construction in 2028, 29. It will take 2 construction seasons. And then obviously we have a free flowing stream and a new natural area that gets monitored and maintained. And this is where I'm going to kind of turn it over to Amy to talk through kind of what's been going on the design phase and where we are.
Yeah, so we are basically working towards a package called DAP, Design Acceptance Package, that's at Adjourn. And that's basically considered like a 60% design package. There are elements of the project that are catching up to the stream bed restoration component. So that was the first kind of component that was fleshed out was like, well, what's the channel gonna look like? Are we gonna do full restoration? Now we're adding the elements like bridge design, the pedestrian bike trail undercrossing. What is the sewage line crossing that the city owns across the town? That's gonna have to change. What is that going to look like? So right now we're in the part where we're basically trying to catch up all of those design elements to the channel restoration. So that includes everything from the sediment sampling work, which you guys probably know about, that happened last summer. It includes all of the survey work that was completed by ODOT. Everything's been surveyed, property lines, infrastructure, you name it, has been surveyed. It includes everything from construction paving to roads resurfacing to, I mean, every meeting you could ever imagine I have been to. So yeah, that's where we're at, and we're hoping to have the draft design acceptance package by June to July in that time frame. So it's full steam ahead. It's been moving furiously.
And the pedal is to the metal for a bunch of obvious reasons that relate to both the politics and the fundraising as well as the project timeline. One of them is really getting that that design verification package by August. That timeline was created to position us for the culvert aquatic organism passage funding that is due in September. It is still on Federal Highway's website, and we are bird dogging it, and I had a conversation with Wyden staff, or Merkley staff today about that. And, you know, that is one of the federal sources we've been looking at. There are kind of a couple of things that we will be working very closely with the city on. I mean, we're obviously always working closely with the city, but specific design ingredients that intersect with city stuff. One of them is Kellogg. Obviously, that has an intersection with both the trail undercrossing and with how close it, again, you're in these meetings, but how close it is to the channel, and what's the construction phasing in terms of, is that going to be an area that can be used for staging?
A lot of it's like geotechnical stuff. We want to make sure that everything that we're doing isn't going to impact what California is doing, and then we've been looking really closely with that.
Because from the timeline you put in your previous slide, it sounds like Coho Point's gonna start before.
So this is an interesting new, like,
Coho is ahead of the curve.
yeah. I think, there was a time when we thought Coho would have been built way long ago, and we would be dealing with.
And Milwaukie Bay Park.
Yeah, well, I guess that's it. Now we are engaging both teams and needing to play, connector and have their engineers talk to engineers and design team talk to design team, because the timing will be a little bit interesting. Coho is still moving forward. Andy's already working with Fareed and BlackRock Development to re-engage about a lot of the shared agreements that we need to get done. And based on initial conversations after our post-FEMA Clomer process, I think they wanted to get started by next summer, so we could see land moving around on that property next summer, but still a lot to figure out. And a lot to be also figured out between the two projects.
They're basically butting right up against each other.
Yeah.
So construction management, and it's going to be something that's really going to have to be managed.
The other one is the sewer line relocation, and obviously it's the sewer line that runs underneath Kellogg Lake right now, and that's part of the design process.
Is that sewer line that's serving the big apartment complex down there?
And some of the residential areas. So several apartment complexes in the streets.
And the engineer design team just sent out a memo today, actually, about different design alternatives that Mandy's gonna staff.
Because I was like, depending on what's going on with paths, I mean, it could be a bridge, it could be attached to a bridge, right? It doesn't have to all be buried underground, right? And if there's gonna be a footbridge across the creek at some point further up,
There's 3 different design alternatives, and we'll have to go through them all.
The third one is the work that Joseph has really been doing with Metro about working with their real estate negotiation team around the acquisition of either properties or easements or agreements, whatever we need for the property owners whose footprint, whose parcels include below the current ordinary high. So that's Miramonte Appointment Apartments and David Cole, and also other property owners whose property might be changed by the drawdown, even if we're not actually doing anything on their property. And that's kind of an ODOT requirement for their projects. So
none of the properties on the other side of the creek, it's only the properties on the west side that have, where we need these.
properties.
See what we can do.
and then there's one other thing that is not on the slideshow, but that we talked about last Thursday with Adam, which is just really kind of starting the process of saying, okay, what are going to be as we come up with a design for the natural area, especially for any kind of access or amenities, how do we just really start that conversation about like, okay, how do we do this in a way that allows us something that is obviously manageable to maintain, and what does that look like, and really planning ahead for all of that. The community engagement side has been really kind of hitting it right now. So the community action team has been together for a couple of meetings now. It's about 39 people at the first meeting, and I think about 28 at the second. And this is a group of people that we convened along with Unite Oregon, which is focuses on communities to really follow the design process through, get their input in a really meaningful way about the things where community input is, where there's a choice. Basically, there's obviously not going to be a choice about, the road surface of the bridge, or, some of the things that are regulated, and that, we're not gonna, there's, that sort of thing we can't change anyway. But when it comes to how people are thinking about the optional elements and the new natural areas, and what's going to make people really see it as the highest value community asset. And there's been some really interesting conversations. And at this point, we're talking about it at a high level. And as the design progresses, we'll be talking about it with them about more specific elements as the design team gets to them. Whether it's trails or access points or, signage and interpreted, programming, things like that. We've also been doing some broader engagement, everything from bilingual bird walks, where we talk about the project, to tours during the crummy weather parts of the years. We did a series of online webinars about it. We're keeping very close track of all these comments. Peyton Priestman, I know several of you have met her, has been really kind of managing those comments, and so that we can really just be like, okay, here's what people are saying about trails, or here's what people are saying about parking, or here's what people are saying around the kinds of, like access or family-friendly aspects or things like that. And that is also being coordinated between us and JLA with public involvement, which is ODOT's contractor on the public involvement side. So this is definitely something we're pretty proud of in terms of a much deeper, much more inclusive way of engaging the community than typically happens, I think, in a lot of natural resource projects that I've seen. A couple of other things that are still going on and starting on the monitoring side. So the BioBlitz, as you all probably have gotten somewhere between 10 and 20 emails from us over the last couple months, is next Saturday. This is the second year we've done it. Last year was spectacular weather and got covered by OPV. And that'll just be based out of our office. The student macroinvertebrate monitoring is going up and running. The fall, the spring, there'll be a short spring season, but the bulk of the monitoring happens in the fall. Every year, there's more and more teachers that want to do it. And unfortunately, there's not more days on the calendar every year. We also have done some volunteer amphibian surveys in the impoundment. We have the duck race coming up, obviously. And again, we're hoping that there's only 2 more duck races over dams we are also gearing up to do some freshwater mussel surveys. We got a grant from OWEB. So eDNA testing reveals, you probably know, that there's a species of native freshwater mussel called the Oregon floater in the impoundment. And we have their DNA, but we don't actually know where they are. And we need to locate those beds because when the impoundment is drained, we want to be able to salvage them and move them, like the Goats Bottom. Some of them are actually going to go to the Umatilla Tribe propagation facility. And there's also other species of native mussels higher up in the watershed that we're also going to be surveying. And then we're also working on a lake cleanup to just pull garbage out of the impoundment as best we can in probably late summer, early fall, and it's nice and warm and the water is low. And that's a partnership with us and 12 River Keepers. So there's going to be a lot of things like that going on. We've obviously had plenty of stewardship days, and this is really all keeping the public's eye on this project. You know, they heard a lot about it when we got some of the big grants. They obviously saw all the equipment in there when we were sediment sampling, and some of them thought that was the project that was going to happen. And so this is partly to achieve a lot of things that we need done, like monitoring data and stewardship, and also really just to keep the community involved in the project. Fundraising, and this is kind of obviously the harder part of the conversation right now. Again, we need a bunch of money. Metro's money does not expire until 2032. I have heard nothing from Metro that they're like, oh, we don't, that they might do anything different with the project if they don't think it's going to happen. We are hoping to get an agreement with Metro signed by the end of June. The agreement is actually between Metro and ODOT. But that support seems to be strong. We are also watching the rumors that have been swirling around NOAA fisheries, both related to DOGE and related to the president's FY26 budget and a series of, all the conversations that are going on, both in relation to a grant that we submitted in our existing grant, the grant that we submitted in February that has finally stopped sitting in a pile, but it's not clear what's going to be funded or not. Again, the Protect grant got canceled. The Culvert AOP grant, these are both out of federal highways, is still on the website, but no one really knows what to say with confidence. So on the federal level, things are obviously, as you all know, very strange. One thing we are eyeing on the state level is the Oregon settlement with Monsanto. That is about a $750 million settlement. That is the program for that is still being created, and I have been trying. They just hired the staff for it last month, basically. So I have been trying to really kind of sell them on, okay, you've got this new pot of money. Don't you want a really visible first win? And and let's get this thing going. And we have a lot of, there's a lot of ways this project could fulfill the legislative purposes of that settlement. Again, there's no rulemaking that's been done yet.
So can if you gave me the top 5 things found in the sediment testing, it would all just go over my head. It would all just go over my head, but historically, it was an agricultural area. So, that's a great tie, to Monsanto.
Agricultural chemicals
Absolutely.
in the sediment.
Okay.
Yeah, it totally is absolutely a great tie. The quick thing on the sediment, and again, Amy's the expert. We are still awaiting a formal sediment treatment from Portland Sediment Evaluation Team. But there weren't a whole lot of surprises in what we found. other than that, what we also already suspected, which is in some places it's really deep. And that was probably because they dug it out to build McLaughlin, but no one knows for sure. We are also working, and this is on a conversation really basically, it's mostly ODOT driving this part of the train with the Port of Portland, which has a big hole, and we have a bunch of it.
Oh,
So, and, you know, we don't, based on what we've
they have
heard.
a big hole that's not in the water, or they would let us put this dirt in the water?
No, it wouldn't go in the, it wouldn't be going in the water, it'd be going in the airport, actually.
Oh, okay.
It's for a potential future runway,
Yeah.
is that,
Oh,
They want to fill their holes so that they can build future runways.
okay.
Like we entered.
you know, what we do know, like, and again, this is nothing new and stuff we were not gonna be able to do or wouldn't want to do anyway. We don't think we'll be allowed to release any of the sediment downstream. That would even not, whether or not there's anything in the sediment, we probably wouldn't be able to do that anyway because the Willamette is not a waterway, there's a shipping channel. So that would probably have been hard to begin with. And we won't be able to leave bare beam surfaces exposed to air, which we also wouldn't want to do because it's super soft, fine sediment. And, you know, so what that means is we'll basically be covering it with some sort of native soil or cobble or plants or all of the above. We were obviously going to want to put plants there anyway but we wouldn't want the stream, if we just left it anyway, it would do exactly what it did at Rynearson Creek, where it just the stream immediately down cut into the soft sediment and lost its floodplain. And that obviously is not what we're trying to achieve. So
We should have so PSET issues a sediment suitability determination, and we should have that probably, I would say, in the next 60 days.
Hey, what was the dollar amount on Protect and AOP?
they're both
Separately.
50.
They were both 50?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And, you know, again, I had a conversation with Mercury staff today because they are collecting their wish lists for the next Transportation Authorization Act. And part of our message to them will be, well, we definitely want the culvert AOP, but you're really talking about FY26. And you haven't given out a dime from this program since that was supposed to start in FY23. So, come on, guys, you know? And obviously Berkeley is not the problem. But, you know, that's kind of so really kind of the next phase of this with the partnership with the city. Obviously, we're gonna be doing a ton of fundraising. We'll be working with the city as a political champion and as a fundraising partner. We are doing a lot of message pivots depending on who we're talking to. You know, when we are more than happy to sell this as we have an earthquake vulnerable bridge, let's replace it type project to federal highways that no longer is interested in the environmental justice components of the project, which are still significant and will still happen. And there's a lot of, you know, message pivots like that. There's values in flood attenuation. There's values that we're just starting to really understand more fully over the next couple of months, hopefully, on reduction of future risk of harmful algae blooms in the environment, which we all know will not get better if we don't do anything. But we're really starting to work with OHA, and so we can kind of really put some rigor to what that means. Coho Point, again, close coordination on right-of-way stuff with Metro and these landowners, the future natural area plan for this natural area. And again, just really setting all of ourselves up as a partnership so that when we fund this project, we can fund as many years of that maintenance as part of the construction as we can and have a plan for that. And the city sewer line, we already talked about. And I think that is what we have. April, I think, is planning on coming on, she said July 8th, and she can give a whole nother level of technical detail that I can't.
She's on our agenda?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, she's on forecast.
By then, we should be neck deep in the design acceptance package, so there'll be a lot more technical.
Yeah.
Are we, I read your monthly thing that you sent out, and, it said something that made me wonder about the railroad trestle.
Oh,
Is
yeah.
that all copacetic?
Well, yeah, there's.
Yeah, it's moving forward. So we have a agreement with UP for them to participate in the design process. They're paid to play. So for them to review our plans and to make sure they're accepted, they need a $100,000 agreement with them to review it. Part of why we were really excited about the design team that was selected is that they have a railroad consultant. That's all they do is deal with the railroads. So our design team has a really great rail foundation to be able to work with UP. And ODOT has a rail department that all they do is deal with the railroads. So I think we're set up to be very successful. It's going to be a big cost item in our budget. There's going to have to
We're
be
gonna have
modifications to
to-
the train trestle.
We're gonna have to buttress their trestle.
Yes. There's no hole for a creek, it's just.
They have been out working on their line.
We've also have had survey crews surveying in the structure itself. Pretty soon here, they're gonna have like people in four-point harnesses hanging off the survey, like all parts of it, so, yeah, it's.
Yeah, the railroad obviously is one of the design constraints, and we obviously all know how much fun it is to deal with those types of institutions, but it's just part of getting the project done.
I will say we have a risk register, and in that risk register, it has all of the things that are going to potentially slow us down. And we're trying to move anything that is a higher risk to the front of the line. So things like the railroad were one of the first items that we started dealing with, and getting our agreements in place with them, and moving forward with that, so.
So you probably know this, but Rep. Gamba is on the Transportation Committee of the state, and apparently the railroads come to him regularly for things. So he may be able to.
You're uniquely.
Yeah. Yeah, they also meet with Berkeley staff monthly,
Yeah.
which is also, like when we first started working with them, like that was what we had to go through to get them just to call us back. Now it's kind of a lot of different categories where we're just gonna say this.
Yeah, it's so interesting that's owned by UP when they don't operate the trains.
Yeah, they lease it to entities in Wyoming.
Portland and Western is a subsidiary, yeah. And they're not very good neighbors, I will tell you that. They're not
I
very
have
good neighbors, which
I have yet to hear of a railroad that is. Yeah, I mean, obviously, as you all know, I think part of the sediment sampling was also like doing the geotech around the footings of the trestle, because they have no as-built plans for it. So like, they have no idea how deep their footings are, or what they're in, which
wow.
is also, it dates to sometime a little before World War I.
Other questions, folks? All right, well,
It's far.
it's exciting. It's good to have an update, because, yeah, I did feel like we hadn't updated in a while. It's been a weird year.
Yeah, no, it's good chance to catch up on it, especially with all the changes that have been kind of swirling out at DC.
Yeah. Well, we'll look forward to seeing April and ODOT in July.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, and we will have a lot more information.
Thanks for the work you've done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right, so we are adjourned from our work session, and we will convene at 6:30 for our regular session.